Hello everyone. My name is Elijah Kinnear.
And I'm Tommy Mulcairns.
And welcome to Deconstructing Politics, Gen Z's favorite scrappy little activist show. Today in the news, we have some very interesting Christian nationalist shit coming out of Oklahoma schools. Would you like to start us off, Tommy?
Sure, gotta love Oklahoma. So this is according to the New York Times. Today, the Oklahoma State Superintendent is requiring schools to teach the Bible. The move comes a week after Louisiana passed legislation that mandates all public schools to display the Ten Commandments. It is already facing a legal challenge from a group called Americans United for Separation of Church and State. The president, Rachel Lazar, of the organization said that public schools may teach religion, but they can't preach it.
Well. They like separation of... Well, they like the Constitution until it's separation of church and state. Now we have religion officially taught in schools. It would be interesting to see. Can you imagine going to class every day and seeing the Ten Commandments posted up somewhere? I
almost went to Catholic school, so that was almost a reality, but thankfully I went to public school.
I also almost went to Catholic school. I would have been seeing that stuff every day.
The Catholic school potential to radio host pipeline?
It's definitely an existing issue. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we're seeing a lot of this of the breakdown. I mean, this has been a goal from Republicans for a very long time, is to really kind of break down that wall between church and state, really involve religion into every aspect of society, and this is just another move in that. Thankfully, the mandate is already facing several legal challenges from Americans United. So very good for we have Americans United.
Which Americans United also was one of the groups that put forward legal challenges against Louisiana, who again just passed legislation mandating all public schools to display the Ten Commandments. So I mean, it seems like Americans United for Separation of Church and State is putting legal challenges forward. I'm not sure with the current Supreme Court that it is going to actually turn into anything. I think the Supreme Court could very seriously rule that religion in schools is fine. I mean, I think this is a part of the right-wing project that the Federalist Society has been going for so long. This is the point of having a right-wing majority, you know?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, this has been a goal for a long time, and now we're seeing kind of the hints of Project 2025, the hints of the current Republican agenda is to really... the real Handmaid's Tale stuff, really combine religion and the state, and really get people indoctrinated into that. And I'd like to make a point. You know, if we were talking about the Ten Commandments, I'm pretty sure Trump failed most of them. You know, it's a little bit hypocritical. So it's some crazy stuff. I really feel for the Oklahoma students. It's going to be what they have to face.
Well, I mean, I think all jokes aside, as I was kind of alluding to, this is part of the right-wing project, again, to move towards a fascist state, in my opinion, right? Because this is Christian nationalism at its core. This is a movement towards fascism, which, nothing against Christianity whatsoever, but the specific combination of American conservatism, especially in rural areas, with religion as a tool for political power is a very dangerous combination.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, this is definitely just a Christian power grab, establishing fascism in America.
Specifically, an evangelical right-wing Christian. It's a very specific segment of the Protestants who have just lost their minds.
Yeah. Too bad that, it's kind of weird. We got the Protestants kind of going crazy with the evangelicals, and meanwhile we have the woke Pope himself, Pope Francis. Go back in time and bring Martin Luther up here and he's going to have a stroke.
Woke to a degree. I mean, he did drop the F slur pretty recently. I think it's really funny. He dropped the F slur after being queer people belong in church and everything. So maybe he earned himself a pass. I can't speak for queer people, but if you're gonna bring us into the Catholic Church, go ahead, Francis. You can say it. You can say it. And I will say, queer people do use that slur a lot. Do we know the Pope's sexual orientation? I mean, is there a possibility that he's maybe a bi baddie?
Is Pope? Oh, I know Pope Francis is a bi baddie. I mean, some of the stuff he said has been totally slay.
Well, he's kind of a diva too. I think there was someone who tried to grab his hand or something, and he slapped at them. Very sassy.
It was a very sassy slap. And then next up on the news agenda, some very interesting scenes from South America that we're kind of used to at this point. There was an attempted coup on Wednesday. A top military general tried to remove the democratically elected president in Bolivia. The president, who was democratically elected, is part of the Movement for or Socialism Party, so he is himself a Latin American socialist.
The president, the military general, is not a socialist.
The president. Once again, the president, not the military general. The general has now been arrested, and according to the New York Times, they reported in all the attempted afternoon incursions into the palace lasted just 3 hours. As time wore on, it became clear that General, I'm not even going to attempt to... Zanuga?
Sure.
A couple of white boys trying to pronounce a Spanish name. Plan had little support. I mean, I was watching that footage. It was kind of like the farce of Pinochet's coup. There was like a tank ramming into the doorway, like police and military marching down. And then they got to the door and they're like, oh, well, never mind. So just before being arrested, the military general claimed without evidence that the president had told him to stage the coup to raise the president's popularity, which is an insane lie.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the parallels between this coup and January 6th are pretty crazy, right? Because you have this right-wing military dictator, not that Joe Biden is a communist or anything, but trying to overthrow the quote-unquote left-wing. In this case, the president of Bolivia actually is very left-wing, but Joe Biden is not. So you have a right-wing fascist essentially trying to overthrow, in a very poor attempt, the government, right? Like, this only lasted 3 hours. That's crazy. They had no plan. They didn't know what they were doing. And they gave up pretty much immediately. They were like, they went in there, they had their fun, and then they just stepped back. I think it's also important to note that Bolivia has had 190 coups in 200 years. So that's almost a coup
insane.
a year. Yeah.
That's insane. I loved the footage coming out of that. Well, it's scary stuff. I really feel for the Bolivian people because, Latin America has a long history with those coups, especially Bolivia, 190. For the listeners that don't know, I think during the Trump administration, Evo Morales, their socialist president at the time, himself got couped, which they had many years fight to undo that. But it was... I mean, there's a really good shot. Listeners can find it on Twitter or wherever, where the president comes out of the palace and he's face to face with the general, just like, "All right, man, what's up? What you doing?" And then the general ended up backing off and leaving. I mean, the most wild, just like the president said no, and the general's like, fair,
yeah,
I'm
valid.
going home.
What?
Valid. Yeah, no, all right, word. I won't coup your country.
My bad G.
I guess I'll go home. But it's really interesting. I think we're kind of seeing this era where these kind of coups are not happening. I mean, we saw in Russia, I think it was it 2023, Tommy? 2022, Prigozhin?
It was 2023.
Yeah. The leader of the Wagner group, this far right, military, mercenary group, tried to coup the Russian government. And they ended up basically the same thing that happened in Bolivia, turning back at the last minute. They were essentially like, okay, nope, we're not doing this actually. Prigozhin ended up getting assassinated. But is the era of coups over? I mean, that was like the entire of the Cold War. But now it's, I mean, especially with the Joe Biden presidency seemingly kind of pulling away from that sort of thing.
There's definitely been a trend of failed coups because you have these very small, very niche far-right groups, usually in the military, who are trying to lead coups, whereas I think other successful coups have been more, at least a little bit more popularly backed. And I think with both Prigozhin, right? Because Prigozhin did not lead the Russian military. He leads a smaller faction. I forgot the name of it. But he essentially...
the Wagner Group?
Yes, the Wagner Group. Thank you. The Wagner Group is a small group of militias. It is not the Russian military. So you have these weird, small right-wing factions that are trying to overthrow the government. And that's been a trend in recent years. I don't know if the era of coups is over. I think you could still see some more successful ones in less established countries. But I think that we're definitely entering an era where more countries are becoming stable, where more countries are not facing the same type of, the same type of serious threat from military coups that they would have been before.
Yeah, I would almost say, I think a big part of it is kind of, when it comes to American foreign policy, we've kind of retreated into this isolationist, more we don't really care what other governments are doing.
Unless it's Israel.
You stole the words right out of my mouth. Gosh. He beat me to it. But yes, unless it's Israel, we've seen this massive retreat from foreign policy from the U.S. I'm sure I mean, there's a lot of jokes on Twitter at the time of like, oh, is the CIA in on this? Are they coming back? And it turns, I think, by the fact that it failed and Joe Biden immediately released a statement denouncing it. No, it wasn't us this time. For once, like the one coup that wasn't us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the CIA is too focused on they're too woke now. You know, they're too woke to do coups. Bring back the good old days of the CIA when they could overthrow a country no problem.
Yeah, did you see that like one CIA ad where they were like talking about their diversity and they were like highlighting and that sort of thing?
No, that's awesome.
Oh my god! So they brought on this an agent of the CIA who was a black woman, and it's just her going on a speech about how much like diversity means to the CIA and talking about all that. And I think it's just so funny. It's kind of like when the FBI like tweets every Martin Luther King Day how about like Martin Luther. It's like, you guys did so much in the 60s and 70s. Who are you talking? What are you doing?
I think it's really cool to see both corporations and three-letter agencies like the FBI and CIA adopt like leftist aesthetics as a selling point, even though they're like the biggest forces opposing and have been historically the biggest forces opposing any type of serious liberation for queer people or women or all of these things. So like, I mean, what a great, not cynical thing at all to do, to turn around and be like, yeah, we love FBI. Our bad. We kind of assassinated him, whatever. Yeah. We don't talk about that.
Ignore the letter we sent to Martin Luther King. The listeners can look it up. FBI sent a letter encouraging MLK to commit suicide. Like, don't worry about that. We love this guy. This is great. Become the next LGBTQ person on the FBI. You know, spy on your friends. Let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it was a letter of encouragement, right? It may have been encouraging suicide, but that's still a letter of encouragement.
That is. And then I believe
Kenya is up next. So,
is it Kenya? Oh,
a lot of stuff going on in Kenya. If anyone has been on social media over the past few days, you've probably seen videos and images of the protests that erupted throughout the country. It was led by young people, a youth-led movement, and it was started because lawmakers passed a bill which would raise taxes, significantly driving up the cost of living for millions. Now, Kenya in Africa is one of the more established countries. It is much more economically well off than some of the other South African countries, but still, I mean, people are not... It doesn't matter what country you're in. You can't raise taxes to a point that would significantly destroy the lives of millions. So the law was put forward after a visit to the United States by Kenyan President William Ruto. During that visit, Ruto signed deals with President Biden aimed at lowering debt and incentivizing long-term investments in Kenya. So basically, they were trying to bring capitalism to Kenya. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps capitalism, like the classic.
Yeah, like fend for yourself. You know, what do you mean you need rent? What's rent? Now, just fend for yourself. Go for it, dog. It's insane. Like, especially in a time where globally we're seeing a cost of living crisis. I mean, every single country's going through it. To be like, yeah, I want to make that worse. Actually, you know, what are you gonna expect? You're gonna see young people on the streets, as we've seen, you know, everywhere else. Like, what are you talking about?
Well, sorry, just a button here. I think too, what it shows is that the reason government spending can be so high in countries, especially in capitalist countries, is because they need to pay for things like driving up investment from businesses and lowering debt. Right, like it's all focused on the top 1%, things that would benefit the top 1%, because they didn't have to raise taxes to be able to build their country up to the point that it's been right now. Right, they only needed to raise it so that they could then afford this new deal that Ruto signed with Biden. Yeah,
no, it's definitely really interesting. I see some of the footage coming out of there. It's, I mean, tear gas in the streets. I mean, you almost think that you're in France with how crazy the protests have been. I encourage listeners to check out the footage. It's some really insane stuff, and shout out to those people. I mean, I saw some statements by socialists that are in Kenya, some very progressive groups there that said this is a working class struggle. This is a tax code that's going to really hurt the working class. So they're all really united in this protest, and I hope the best for them. I think it did they back down from the bill, correct? I think I saw that.
Yes, they did. So the president, so what happened was they passed this bill. So Ruto goes to America, signs these bills with Biden, and basically he doesn't say it, but it's pretty obvious that like to fund this deal that he's signing to increase business investment, foreign business investment within Kenya, that they need to raise taxes to be able to afford it. Because you do have to, and this happened with the Pfizer Forum, right, where you have these big businessmen worth millions and billions of dollars, and countries compete, and in this case cities compete for their investment within their cities or countries. So what they'll do is, like, we gave $300 million to the Pfizer Forum people so that they would build the Pfizer Forum. Like, we covered a lot of it, and it's because we say, like, well, we need to basically cover some of this cost to make it quote unquote profitable for them. So what happens is the cities and countries wind up footing the bill, and then the millionaires and billionaires just wind up reaping the profits. So to pay for this new bill, they had to raise the taxes. That led to mass protests. So during the mass protests, which erupted all throughout Kenya, President Ruto deployed police and the military, who fired tear gas and guns at the protesters. There's a really, really hard video of a Kenyan protester picking up a tear gas canister and smoking the tear gas. It was pretty crazy.
God. That's insane. I love that.
Well, they killed 5 in the capital and injured 31, and this comes a week after 1 person was killed and 200 were injured in protests throughout Kenya.
Harming protesters is always a great way to get them to stop. I'm sure that is definitely going to go over well for the government. Condolences to those people that have died. They are in a massive struggle that I think everyone in the working class understands. Everyone that is living in poverty or looking at that rent bill at the end of the month, I know it's coming up for me, that can deeply emphasize. So our hearts and our solidarity go out with the Kenyan people.
Right.
Hopefully they can really improve the situation there.
Well, as you were saying, Ruto goes to U.S., signs a deal with Biden, comes back, passes a tax law. Protests erupt, and the protests were so intense and so widespread that it did force the president to back down from the bill. Now, this could be temporary, right? He could bring it back at a different time, but there are lesser protests than the ones that erupted over the tax bill for Ruto to step down. So we'll have to see if those are successful.
Yeah,
but
I hope so. And then I think next up on the docket, something that you and I especially have probably know too much about. I would say a little too terminally online. Recently, in the New York primaries, a representative, Jamaal Bowman, a member of the Squad, a progressive House member, was beaten in the primaries by a more centrist, I'd almost say a little conservative Democrat candidate, who was massively funded by AIPAC. AIPAC, for those that don't know, is this political PAC for a Zionist group that really hardly supports Israel. He's a big Zionist, and he recently beat Jamaal Bowman in the primary, which is, I think, a huge setback for the progressive movement, the left-wing movement in America. And when I got that news, I was very upset. Emotions are very high when it comes to the progressive movement right now. AOC released a statement saying essentially that the Democratic Party has to have a hard conversation about AIPAC, about its influence, because, Jamaal Bowman was endorsed by Hakeem Jeffries, a Zionist himself. He was endorsed by multiple people within the Democratic Party, but was taken out solely because AIPAC money was in the race.
Well, not just a little bit of AIPAC money. AIPAC is a very rich group. This was the most expensive House race to date. There was the most money poured into this House race than any other House race in history. So, AIPAC really mobilized all of their forces, and I think it's because this race was symbolic of the Palestine-Israel divide within the Democratic Party, and AIPAC wanted to make clear that if you are in any way critical of Israel, even slightly of the genocide that Israel is committing, that they will take you out. They will take you down.
Yeah, no, definitely. Jamaal Bowman was one of the few members that called what was going on in Gaza a genocide. He was one of the few members of Congress that really came out in support for Palestine and that sort of thing. And they just wanted him gone, and we saw AIPAC funnel millions of dollars into that race, and now he's gone, and now he's been replaced with a conservative, centrist Democrat that I'm sure will be proving a lot of trouble, as we've seen from other centrist Democrats, for even basic Biden agenda. So it's tough. What do you think? My main question is, what does this mean for the left-wing movement? Is this a setback in the way of we're on the back foot, or is this just something that we're going to have to move forward and tackle?
Well, look, I don't think Palestinian liberation was ever going to come from electoral politics, right? I don't think you were ever going to legislate your way away from Israel, especially when you have such a pro-Israeli president as you do with Biden. I think that it's going to take mass mobilization by the people protesting against their government. However, I think that it does help to have congressional candidates and people in Congress actually coming out in defense of Palestine and criticizing Israel. And I think that this is going to have a silencing effect on some other pro-Palestinian Congress people. And if there were any centrists on the fence who were we're looking at Israel's genocide and we're sort of moving more towards the pro-Palestinian side, they are absolutely not going to speak out now. So I think it'll have a silencing effect within Congress, which plays a small role within Palestinian liberation, but it certainly plays a role.
Yeah, thankfully, I think we've seen J. Paul and Ilhan Omar really being able to fight off these challenges. I know they've been really going after Omar as well, and so far they've been able to beat it. I think we were talking about this earlier. If you look at Jamaal Bowman's district, it's the Bronx and what's the other side?
Westchester.
Westchester.
Which is a very upper class, very bourgeois, very centrist part of New York. So you had the Bronx, which is also AOC's district, which tends to be much more left leaning, much more working class, and then up against, and the majority of Bowman's district was Westchester. So I don't know if they redrew the district lines since Bowman's first win or what happened, but somehow Bowman was able to win in that district before and now. Both because of AIPAC money and because Westchester is just a very pro-Israel, very pro-big businesses section of New York. I think those two forces combined to take down Bowman.
I mean, I did look at the vote totals in my anger, and it looked like that Bowman overwhelmingly won in Bronx, and it was not even close. But his challenger was able to win very hard in Westchester, and that's honestly what gave the seat to him. So that's just an uphill battle to begin with, but it is definitely just it's a sign that electoral politics it's really hard when it comes to this issue, when it comes to the struggle, and the real power, the real victory is going to come from in the streets protesting, any working class action we can have with the labor unions. So,
well, and I mean, you see this like this dynamic of AIPAC having huge influence on Democratic primaries is playing out even on a local level, right? Like Ryan Clancy, who is a Democratic Socialist of America member and elected, is facing right now a big challenge from an AIPAC-backed candidate. And the line that they're running with is essentially, look at Ryan Clancy. He is a fake Democrat because he's not super pro-Israel. He doesn't consider himself a Democrat. All this, blah, blah, blah. And it's the exact same dynamic, right? Like AIPAC is funneling money into this race. Not as much as Jamaal Bowman's race, because this is for a state legislature, state representative seat. But they're targeting local races. They're targeting state races. They're targeting federal races. So there is no end to AIPAC's attempt to influence elections. They really want to take over the U.S. government.
Yeah, if we're going to do anything, it's going to be in the streets, trying to get the Democrats to abandon AIPAC, trying to change the national narrative to make it extremely hard to even run on being a Zionist, to make it even run on taking AIPAC money. It's just frustrating. We're seeing, as you said, with Ryan Clancy, we're seeing this challenge everywhere. Hopefully Ryan can beat it out because he is a strong voice for the Palestinian movement. He has been in constant support, but
for all left-wing causes, I would say.
Yeah, exactly, for all left-wing causes. And I think for the left, what this means for progressives and the left, socialists, et cetera, we really have to come out and support and kind of consolidate and really make sure that we don't lose more people, because, like we said, the electoralism isn't going to solve it, but to lose such a voice on the national level is very hard. And hopefully, I'm hoping to God, in 2 years, maybe this guy gets ousted. He has enough racist statements on record, if AIPAC feels comfortable and, isn't sending so much money, hopefully we can take it back. But I'll miss my fire alarm pulling king, that was.
Yeah, he did pull the fire alarm. I forgot about that. That was really funny of him to do.
To delay a legislation. What a king.
Well, and I think, another thing that AIPAC's dominance goes back to was our very first topic that we were talking about today, which is the dominance of the evangelical. A very small fraction of the population makes up this evangelical wing of the Protestants, but they are very, very powerful when it comes to politics, because AIPAC, a lot of its funding, I think the majority of its funding does not come from Jewish people. It comes from far-right evangelical Protestant Christians who have this idea that once Israel gets all the land back, then the rapture starts or whatever. It's a very crazy belief. So they're very pro-genocide and one of the biggest funders of AIPAC. But it just goes to show their dominance within politics and how this minority has essentially tried to take over the government. And when you have a minority trying to take over the government and trying to inflict harm on minority groups like LGBTQ people, on black people, that is fascism,
Yeah. Oh, exactly. So, Well, we'll see how this is going forward. Do we have time for a quick mini news story? Do we have a? I'm looking at my producer. They just shook their head. Oh yeah, a little bit. Okay, cool.
Do you want to talk about the critically ill children who were allowed to leave Gaza for the first time? Or do you have a different idea?
Yeah. See, now I feel bad because I was going to talk about British electoral politics. Yeah, British electoral politics, or Palestine. No, real quick. I don't know if you've been watching this, Tommy. I have been. I'm obsessive when it comes to foreign politics. We're seeing a crazy time in history where there's several elections in multiple countries, both our own and other European countries, where it seems that the Conservatives in Britain, the Tories as they like to call them, are going to be trounced this next election. I think polls are showing the center-left Labour Party is going to win for over 400 seats, which is historic landslide victory, and just basically almost the full political death of the Conservative Party.
I wouldn't say the full just yet. I think it's like very much the situation when, because the Tories have been in power for what, the past decade, maybe
14
more.
years.
14 years, right. And I think that what you're seeing is Britain continuing a decline that's been on for a long time, especially after Thatcher. And I think that you get these wild swings back and forth as people blame whichever party has been in power for a while. But it is interesting that Britain is bucking the far-right trend that we're seeing in like France, Germany, Italy. I think it's somewhat nice to have the center-left party beating out the more right-wing party. But, I mean, Rishi Sunak has not been a popular leader whatsoever.
Oh, no. I really loved his announcement that he was dissolving Parliament and starting new elections. Did you see this? It was trenching rain. He was getting rained on while people were playing a Labour victory song from the Tony Blair days. They've been going for 14 years, and after 14 years of the same party, of course you're going to get kicked out. But it really seems like people are Britain as a country is so messed up in such a deep trench that they're ready for some change. They're ready to get rid of them, and it's almost seemed like Nigel Farage.
I was just gonna say,
he's back.
Yeah, how's his party doing?
I know that Reform is actually kind of outclassing Tories, the Conservatives in some races. Nigel is just a funny character. I mean, far right, that sort of thing. But kind of like Donald Trump, he is so accidentally funny. I think he had
up the raw.
Some people
slogan.
paid him for a video where he said up the raw, which is an IRA slogan. I almost want him back in Parliament just for the funny moments. It's like, oh my gosh, bring him. But so Reform UK, which is the Conservative challenger to the Tories, is now surging, especially with the Conservatives collapsing. And it's gonna be a very interesting time for Europe as we see all these parties changing, as Conservatives kicked out in Britain, maybe the far right rising in France. We might talk about that more.
Well, maybe
next
it's
time.
fair to say that Britain is just behind the trend, right? Because this far right resistance is popping up in France, Germany, and Italy is coming on the heels of a center left party. So maybe England is just 5 years behind on the trend, but within after 10 years of center left leadership that is kind of milquetoast, doesn't go anywhere, you're going to see the rise of Nigel Farage. Who knows? Nigel Farage could become the prime minister within the next 10 years.
Oh God, don't even say Prime Minister Nigel Farage. I encourage all listeners, just look up Nigel Farage clips.
Incredibly racist, incredibly xenophobic. I mean, all of he hits all the talking points of the far right.
He's like if Trump was snobby and upper class. He's oh my God.
Trump is snobby and upper class.
When they finally got Brexit, when he was just like, oh, who's laughing now to the European Parliament?